Well, one of the things that I'm interested in talking to you about today is the difference between new media and traditional media. And I know certainly for me, one of the things that led me to turn off the news is that I suppose I refer to the news in this sense as very much the traditional mainstream news, but there is so much online at the moment, and I know you mentioned 9/11 there. For me, the thing that really rammed it home was finding out, or I suppose seeing the real, for lack of a better term, footage of the Saddam Hussein statue being toppled down in, I believe it's Firdos Square in Baghdad. So obviously the pictures that you get seen broadcast all around the world, even today, are of a huge crowd. Very much gives across the idea that there's a lot of people there. It gives across the idea it's a very popular thing to have happened. But then you see the broader shot of how many people were actually in the square, and apart from the people in the camera shot, there must be, maybe 10, maybe 15 people at an absolute sort of conservative estimate. So to me, that's something that every time I see that footage now, I just think, but we're in the age of the internet. How can you still sort of promulgate such fake news, sort of false information that way? So just the news has almost made its bed in many ways, but we're also seeing the emergence of such a new form of information and news as well.
Yeah, and I think that there are a couple of things here. One is the accuracy of news, how we can be more confident that news is accurate. And that again ties in with the general psychological principle. Our mental health and well-being is supported by having a relatively accurate view of the world. But it's also supported by the notion of having a more optimistic or hopeful view of the world. Now, this is tricky because it can go against the motive of news companies and companies that produce the news that know that, for example, it's negative newspaper headlines that are going to sell more papers. That's like a truism. And part of the reason for this is that as human beings, we've got what we call a general orienting reflex. And that means that we especially look out for either novel stimuli, or we look out for something which represents threat or danger, or we look at things that are more neutral. And the idea is we can only take in so much information at any point in time. So terrifically, we have what we'd call an attentional filter. And what the attentional filter means is that we are making unconscious decisions of what we will pay attention to. Like, for example, if we hear a loud sound right near us, that will grab our attention because we're first oriented towards threat or danger. That helps survivability. Through evolution, we particularly notice threat or danger. So news gets a payoff by having negative news or negative headlines. Next, we tend to be attracted by novelty. And danger says move away from, but we really notice it, the threat. And novelty says move toward. So that's where if we have positive news stories that can engage us, that can be really worthwhile. And when things are neutral, it says to ignore. So with news, there's a couple of things that we're looking at. One is how accurate might it be for a realistic view of the world? But secondly, how balanced is it in terms of, like, we function best with an optimistic attitude, tending to look at, say, 2 or 3 more times positive than negative information that we take in or comments we make to each other in our lives or whatever. We function better when we have that positive kind of angle, but unfortunately, news gets the payoff from going the opposite and giving us the negative first.